Well, joining me now is Christian Leuprecht, professor at the Royal Military College and Queen's University. Now let's begin by discussing this training agreement. What was the purpose behind the 2013 Joint Military Agreement, sir?
So militaries regularly exercise together, even though they might not possibly be a partner or an ally. You want to build some rapport, and there's different ways of doing that, and staff colleges, exercises, or so forth. And so you need to build some sort of protocols, even with hostile countries and with adversaries, in particular, so you can de-conflict in times of tension. And so this was sort of, I guess, an effort of rapprochement and sort of a professional military-to-military relationship.
Now, General Vance's decision to cancel the exercise drew some criticism from Global Affairs. Can you unpack and explain what that means?
Yeah, I think what that means is that this file lacks serious leadership at the most senior political levels. When we have two departments that are essentially pursuing parallel track strategies in the regards of how they engage in China. And this, I think, is emblematic of the broader challenges Canada faces on the China file in Ottawa. It really requires the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister to provide that leadership and for everybody to take a deep breath in cabinet before we make decisions on China so that we can make sure we can act in unison in the best interests, not just of Canada, but of course of the two Canadians who've now been imprisoned in hostage diplomacy for over 700 days.
Now, some critics feel that Canada is too cautious when it comes to dealing with China. So how does this speak towards our national presence in the international community?
So, look, other countries have a much more sophisticated strategy. The European Union has a strategy that recognizes that on some issues, China is a partner, on some of them a competitor, and on some an adversary. The US has that sort of nuanced strategy. Australia has that nuanced strategy. We seem to be the odd man out that we continue to try to muddle through. And I think it is not serving Canadians, Canada, or Canadian interests particularly well.
Now, as you mentioned, the Canadian military does hold joint exercises with other countries, but what makes the joint exercise with China so unique?
Well, it's a little bit tricky because, of course, the Chinese have Arctic aspirations, for instance, in particular. And so there's always sort of a fine line in terms of the extent to which you might collaborate with the military and the extent to which you, of course, don't want to share your own particular tradecraft and skill sets. And so this was, I guess, an attempt to kind of try to balance the fact that ultimately the Chinese military is a reality that we all need to live with. But clearly the changed environment meant that the Canadian Armed Forces had to make a decision that was in the best interest of Canada, that collaboration was no longer possible under the current circumstances.
And what do you expect to be the reaction of Canadian allies, particularly those in the Five Eyes, to this information?
So Canada, of course, works fairly closely on these issues with its allies, and it's precisely that sort of relationship that then gave rise to sort of misgivings, I think, as much in Canada as elsewhere, that there needs to be a coherent military strategy in terms of engagement with China, that Canada and Canadian Armed Forces wouldn't and couldn't go it alone in terms of that relationship. And so I think it shows that in some ways there's much more coordination among Five Eyes militaries and among allied militaries when it comes to China than there is within Canada's own government, and I think that's problematic.
Well, sir, we've got about 30 seconds left, but what are the next steps for Canada to strengthen its defense against China's influence?
Well, certainly, I mean, Canada will need to be much more realistic about Chinese attempts to interfere in Canadian sovereignty and sovereign decision-making and to influence political decision-making, and that ultimately Canada will need to forge a coherent China policy, and that's ultimately going to require everybody in Ottawa to come together, and we need to manifest that in a more coherent and coordinated fashion among different ministries in how they deal with that China file, and realizing that China is the single greatest geostrategic challenge of the 21st century for Canada.
All right, sir, thank you again for your time today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.